Oh, hello. I didn't see you there. I'm just hiding behind this giant rhubarb leaf. Hello, I'm Chef Sam, and I'm here to present to you a applesauce rhubarb cake. Um, if you have rhubarb growing, you'll know that you have an abundance of rhubarb, and this is a really nice recipe to utilize rhubarb in season, which is now on the West Coast, which is the largest producer of rhubarb between Oregon, Washington, and California. Um, the West Coast produces the largest amount of rhubarb um, in the country. Um, so you might have some in your yard and or garden, and this is from my garden here. Um, so I'm a chef and culinary mentor with Basics Market. And at Basics, we have some in-house brands, which we're going to be utilizing this evening, the milk, eggs, butter, and whipping cream. And so these are all local to the Portland, Oregon area, fresh and organic. Let's go ahead and get into the recipe. Um, so for this, this is a really nice, simple cake. You're going to want to grease up a cake pan such as this, or this is, a 9 by 13 pan, more like a lasagna pan. So this is a sheet, not a sheet cake, but a, a 9 by 13 pan size cake. But a nice big rectangular deal. And I just have some butter at room temperature here. And I'm just going to go ahead and coat the sides fairly liberally. I don't want the cake to stick there. Get into all those corners and then just get a nice even distribution of that butter. You could also use a pan spray here or like a paper towel with a little bit of neutral oil like canola oil, sunflower oil, or safflower oil would work. But butter is nice because it actually helps give the cake a lovely kind of buttery crust around the edges. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and set that aside. And we're going to want to have an oven preheating to 350 degrees. And now we're going to sift our dry ingredients together. So this is a really great classic sort of cake formula where you're going to put your dry ingredients together and then put our wet ingredients together and then combine those and see what happens, which hopefully will be a cake. So we're going to use 2 cups of all-purpose flour, and we're sifting the dry ingredients together. And so what the sifting does is it gets everything really well mixed, and then it just also kind of fluffs it up, gets any clumps and things like that out. Now I'm leveling the dry ingredients out here, especially the flour, and I just use the side of the flour bag for leveling. You can also use the back of a knife or like a bench knife, something flat, just to make sure we have an even measurement there. So that's 1 cup. And I'm going to go ahead and put my salt and baking powder on top of that 1st cup so that we'll be well in the mix there, and just sort of mix that up. And then here I just have a regular old sieve, and that's what I usually end up sifting through. If there's these flour sifting deals too, and I have one of those laying around, but I kind of like this because I can fit more flour in there at once. Okay, and then here I've just got a wooden or a metal spoon, and where you just want to sift all this, and you can see how it's coming out nice and fluffy. And so this is just the salt, the flour, and the baking powder. Now with this recipe, we're using um, buttermilk. And so the buttermilk is going to react with the baking soda. The acidity of the buttermilk helps get the baking soda activated, and it gives us more leavening in our cake. Okay, so here's our dry ingredients, and now we're going to want to have a big bowl to mix up cream, the sugar and butter. So here's our butter, and this is just 1 cube of butter. And that's half a cup. And now here's a 1.5 cups of brown sugar. And I'm going to cream these ingredients. We call this one, we just whiz them up. So here we go. So this is I've been told this is a real crazy mixer here. And it is. It's a wild ride. But it's going to get easier. I hope. It's flying fast and furious. And you know, baking is I guess pretty dangerous sport. Yes, we have a question.
Yes, we have a couple of questions about rhubarb in particular, Chef Sam, and a couple of people wanted to know the leaves are toxic. Is that the case? And also if there's a substitute for the stems in this recipe.
Yeah, well, rhubarb, and when we'll talk more about rhubarb in a second. But to answer the questions, the leaves are toxic. So rhubarb's really neat because the leaves, are inedible, right? They're toxic. They have toxins which act if they accumulate and you eat. Yeah, I think you have to eat quite a bit, but they can accumulate and they can cause organ damage. And so we don't eat the leaves. Now the stalks is what we think of as rhubarb, and that's what we like to use to cook with. And the stalks are delicious and edible. And rhubarb is a vegetable. It's not a fruit, although the applications in which rhubarb is used for is often in kind of fruity scenarios, like it's a dessert vegetable, basically. And then the root of the rhubarb is a medicinal, has medicinal uses, and that's how rhubarb was first only propagated for its medicinal purposes. But yeah, more about that later. Yeah, so this is getting a little bit creamed out here. I should have gotten a bigger bowl. We need bigger glass bowls, I think. All right, so what happens is the sugar and the butter is going to start to meld together. And of course, if you have a stand mixer, this is a great time to use it. Works really well with a stand mixer with the paddle is great for creaming butter and sugar together. Okay, we're getting there. We're getting there.
So Chef Sam, for this recipe, what could you substitute for the rhubarb if you did not have access to fresh or frozen rhubarb?
The substitute. Well, so for this recipe, if you don't have access to rhubarb, you could use apples, would be good. Pears would be nice. Kind of like I would go for
a tart apple or pear. Because rhubarb is quite tart, and that's what we like about it. It has a neat, like sour sort of flavor. It has a very unique kind of tartness, but yeah, a tart apple, like a green apple, or a sort of a tart pear, a nice firm pear would work well here. Okay, we'll call that good. So that's creamed together. There are butter and sugar, and it's also all over the place. So now let's go ahead and we're going to add our egg. And so here I have one beautiful Gwendolyn's organic egg, and these are raised by the basics right here in the Willamette Valley. And so if you're in the area, definitely check out these eggs. They're always fresh and they're really nice to bake with. So we're going to go ahead and add the egg in. Okay, and that really helped cream things out nicely, right? And then we have our buttermilk. So a real quick tip on buttermilk. So buttermilk originally was actually the sort of the whey off of butter, or the leftover milk after butter was churned, and it got a ferment going, which was beneficial in both preserving the butter and it's like a probiotic because it's a lactobacillus kind of fermentation, like yogurt. But in modern times, buttermilk is created with a culture, and so it's that same culture which was made, which occurs naturally as the butter is being made in the milk, but to mass produce it, a culture is added, much like making yogurt. So we have this thick and tangy buttermilk, which is great for as a leavening agent, as well as for making your baked goods kind of tender. It gives things a nice crumb. Now there is if you don't have buttermilk, there is a trick to kind of making a facsimile of buttermilk, an analog, if you will, and that's 1 tablespoon of vinegar to 1 cup of milk. And you just add the vinegar into the milk, let it sit for 5 to 10 minutes, and we should get a little bit of a curdle to it, and that's what you want. And so that'll give you the sour flavor. Also, it will thicken it up a little bit, and it acts in baked goods a lot like regular buttermilk.
Chef Sam, does it have to be whole milk or does it matter?
Whole milk is best for this, yes. But you could use like a 2%. I think it's best to have a little fat content in there. But you could try with non-fat, and even it will work. And even with like non-dairy milks, you can do this like oat milk or soy milk, or would be good choices for non-dairy. Yeah, okay, so let's go ahead and add our buttermilk in there.
Does the order matter in baking as far as which ingredients you add when?
Yeah, well, as I mentioned before, this is sort of a classic cake scenario. So yeah, and cookies, a lot of baked goods sort of start in this fashion, where we're going to cream the sugar and butter together, add the eggs, and then whatever sort of liquids, and blend those in. and then mix that stuff with the dry ingredients, or add the dry ingredients in. So that being said, let's go ahead and do it. So we're going to add the flour in a little bit at a time. And so for this kind of amount, I think we can get away 2 times. And with this crazy blender, I'm going to sort of swizzle it in a little bit first. And then I'm just going to bring the spatula around and get stuff off of the side there. Okay. And then we can add the rest of our dry ingredients. All right. So how is our, let's see, looks like the buttermilk here is coming along. It's sort of thickened up that milk quite a bit. And so that's a great trick. Like, it's great for like buttermilk pancakes. You can kind of make instant buttermilk. All right, so that's nice and smooth. And now we can add our vanilla and our applesauce. So there's a cup of applesauce. And then we have a teaspoon of vanilla. All right. So we'll just keep this around and keep checking on it, but it has thickened, and I'm sure it's soured as well. Okay, so here's our cake batter. And now we're going to go ahead and chop up some rhubarb and cut it in, and talk a little bit about rhubarb, because that is the star of this whole deal. So as I mentioned, I grew this rhubarb in my yard. It's a perennial. It comes back every year once you plant it. And I think I've had this plant for 3 or 4 years. And every fall, winter, I think it just shrivels away, and I don't expect it to come back. And then by this time of year, we're in May, it's just going crazy, and you can see it, big healthy leaves and big stalks. And so that's where you get to the point, like, what do I do with rhubarb? And you can do all kinds of picklings and chutneys and sauces and things, and even sauteed into savory dishes. It's good. It gives that little bit of tang, something like that. But it's really nice in baked goods. Rhubarb strawberry pie is what I make a lot of, and I really enjoy that as well. But rhubarb, we can treat it a lot like a celery. And so for this recipe, I like to kind of cut it into workable sizes. So again, with something like this, you want to go a little bit less than the length of your knife with the length of your material, to make it easy to slice through. And then I'm slicing them lengthwise in half, and then I'm going to go ahead and slice across. And this will give us just a nice distribution of the rhubarb pieces throughout the cake. And then we're looking for 1.5 cups. So I'm just going to go ahead and use some dry measure cups here, and a little extra brown sugar there.
Chef Sam, a couple people have mentioned that you can get rhubarb frozen. Will that work just fine in this recipe?
Oh yeah, yes. So rhubarb, although it it's seasonal. You can often find rhubarb frozen year round, and it will work well for this recipe, you know, and that's another thing you can do if you have a rhubarb plant or more than one, especially you can freeze it and you just chop it up, put it on a sheet pan and put it in your freezer and then bag it up in a Ziploc or a Tupperware, and you can keep it frozen and for like 6 months and it'll stay in good shape for using for cake like this.
So a lot of times when you see rhubarb, it's the stalks are really pink. Does that mean something? Is it riper or are they always green or different varieties?
Yeah, so rhubarb comes, there's many varieties of rhubarb, and they come in a lot of different colors, and it can change throughout the season. And some of my stalks here you can see are a little pinker. Did this, I put the rhubarb in the water here to keep the leaves nice and crispy, and it did this really cool like curling thing and just started to split up the rhubarb and curl, which is very interesting. But yeah, a couple pieces are a little more pink, but yeah, sometimes it can be really intensely red. So rhubarb, the name is derived from its origin, which was in Asia, and the Chinese have been using the rhubarb root for forever, thousands of years, as a medicinal, as medicine. And so it's good for digestive stuff. It's good for all sorts of ailments. And it was a very prized medicine. The rhubarb root was dried and ground up, and then that was traded through Russia to Romans. And so it was traded at this border, which was the river Ra, which is now the Volga River in Russia. And so the Romans called it rhubarb because of the Ra River, and then the barb is from the barbarians. And so anyone outside of you know, the Roman culture is considered a barbarian to them. And so here's this plant from the barbarians across the river Ra, and that is where the rhubarb comes from. But the rhubarb root, the ground dried rhubarb root, was at times more valuable than other, you know, than opium, than you know, other highly traded, and at the time, you know, traded and prized medicine. So it was again used for all kinds of ailments, and highly prized, the root. And it's only been for a couple centuries that we've used the rhubarb as a culinary product. So it was first a medicine and second culinary. Okay, so what we're going to do is gently fold this rhubarb into the batter. And what we're looking for here is a bit of distribution.
If you're using frozen rhubarb, would you thaw it or put it in frozen?
If you're using frozen rhubarb, I'd go ahead and I'd put it in frozen, much like you would, like I'll put in frozen blueberries and blueberry muffins, things like that. And it might tend to, it'll just hold up better in the end, I believe.
We also had a good question from Judy, who wanted to know, could you use a blender on a low speed instead of the mixer to put this batter together?
That is a good question. I suppose you could. You know, I have never done that, but I think if you have a big enough blender, then why not? I don't know how you're with that little blade though. I don't know if you'd really get a good creaming of the butter and sugar. So I'm not sure on that one. But that is an interesting thought. You can use a spoon and just muscle through it also. And that might be a better way to go if you don't have access to a hand mixer or a stand mixer. All right, so now we're going to go ahead and drop the batter into the cake pan. And we have the oven is preheated to 350 degrees. And so this is a really sort of moist, dense sort of cake. So it does take a little while to bake. And it can take 1 hour or so. You'll want to check it though sooner than that, depending on your oven. All ovens cook a little bit differently. So when I'm baking, I'll usually set my timer for halfway through the bake and make sure to check it, see how it's going, and then adjust it or check on it from that point forward. Okay, so we'll go ahead and put this in the oven.
And while you're doing that, Chef Sam, Judy had another good question, which is when you're using applesauce, is it a substitute for anything, or what is the purpose of the applesauce in the recipe?
Oh yeah, well thanks. Great question. The applesauce in this recipe, it's giving us, well, one thing is the flavor. And so this is an applesauce rhubarb cake, and applesauce is a big part of it. But what's neat about applesauce is you can replace part of your fat in baked goods. And you'll see applesauce being used a lot also as an egg replacer in vegan baking. But even in traditional baking, applesauce works nicely as you can replace like half your butter, say, in a recipe like this. And so it's a little bit lighter. It will give you a nice texture as well. But yeah, flavor and replacing some of the fat is what it's doing here in this recipe. Thanks for that question. All right, and yeah, and then this recipe also with the buttermilk, the acid in it, back to the acid of the buttermilk, it also kind of works for the texture of this cake. What the acid does is it tenderizes, like buttermilk is often used as a marinade for things because it breaks down proteins and gluten strands in baking and makes for more a tender crumb. And that's why buttermilk baked goods are always so nice and tender.
So in general, is there a rule of thumb Judy would like to know for substituting a butter for applesauce if you're going to substitute something in a regular cake?
Yeah, if you're trying to get away from butter or oil altogether in your baking, the recommendation is half the amount of applesauce for the amount of oil or butter. So that could either be done by weight or volume, but you just want about half the applesauce, if you're doing a full substitution like that. So before I cut into this, I would like to make a little whipped cream, to go along with it. And I have a bowl of chilling. I actually remembered to chill my whipped cream bowl today. And that's always helpful if you're doing whipped cream, which is lovely on this cake. Chill the bowl first. And a question.
A little bit about cream. So
Yeah.
do you find that some creams have stabilizers and gums in them, and does that make a difference?
You don't need that stuff in cream, and I'm using here the Louisbelle's brand, which is our basics brand of cream. This is our dairy Louisbelle's, and we have that really great butter, milk, and cream. And this cream has is just straight up cream. It's doesn't have anything in it, and you just have to shake it a bit to get everything, you know, which is homogenization, but we're doing it right here manually, where you're blending up the fat back into the bulk of the milk. But yeah, you don't need that's any stabilizers or anything like that. And this cream, I find, just whips up really nice and easy. And I'm just doing sort of a chantilly cream. So I'm adding a little bit of powdered sugar, or sometimes called confectioner's sugar, in there into the cream, and then a little bit of vanilla extract. And I also have some strawberries to put on here because rhubarb and strawberries are so good together. And you just get that sweetness from the strawberries, and you get the lovely tartness from the rhubarb, and they're a really nice pairing.
We see in a lot of old cookbooks rhubarb referred to as pie plant. Is that because it's used in like pies and strawberry rhubarb pies? And what are other things you could do with rhubarb?
Yeah, you know, rhubarb has been used in pies a lot, and one reason, I mean, strawberry rhubarb pie is great, but rhubarb, as it breaks down, it kind of thickens things as well. So it's really nice in pies because not only does it bring a nice counterpoint to like the sweetness of the fruit, but also it sort of helps kind of gel the pie together, and that's why it's a great filling. Another nice rhubarb dessert is crisp, and I like a rhubarb apple crisp, and maybe throw some berries in it as well. And so the crisp would be simply like making a pie filling and then topping it with either a biscuit dough, which is more like a cobbler, right? If you use biscuit dough, it's a cobbler. And then a crisp would be a blend, like a streusel of oats and brown sugar and butter, and maybe nuts. If you do nuts, cover that. You can see this cream came together nice and easy, right? Just while we were talking about all these other lovely desserts, we have some whipped cream. Okay.
Chef Sam, we also have that delicious recipe on our website for strawberry rhubarb sauce, which is one of my favorites.
So other, yeah, right. We have another rhubarb recipe on the website, which I encourage everyone to visit basicsmarket.com, where we have tons of recipes, including this one. And and that rhubarb sauce, which we use a lot for cheesecake, really good, or over ice cream. It's nice. You can make drinks with rhubarb. It's a really nice thing. It gives color as well to, like, say, a sparkling drink infusion. You can make vinegars. I've pickled rhubarb, like a fermented pickle, which was really interesting, and good, strong. You know, chutney is nice, like a rhubarb chutney, this sort of thing, jam, strawberry rhubarb jam. So here's some strawberries, and I just picked these up at one of the Basics locations, and these are really good right now from Seattle, Washington, yummy strawberries. They're really big and they're really red and they're tasty. So I thought it might be fun to just go ahead and, because we're talking about strawberries and rhubarb going well together, why not top this cake with a little strawberry? And berry season is coming up.
So could you freeze any of this cake after it's baked? Would you recommend that, or would it get too mushy?
I suppose, yeah, you could freeze it. You know, you'd want to wrap it up really tight. But yeah, I think most baked goods you can sort of freeze if they're wrapped up well. And yeah, I think you'd be all right. Let's have a go here.
So another good question from Judy. Thank you, Judy. Great questions. She wants to confirm that rhubarb is a vegetable and not a fruit. Is that right?
Oh yeah, Judy. Rhubarb is a vegetable, and so sometimes it's referred to as a dessert vegetable. And yeah, it for whatever reason, it lends itself. You know, I think it's that tart, sweet sort of thing. It lends itself to desserts. And again, it's just a really great counterpoint to the sweetness of, like, berry or apple, something like that. It sets up our palate kind of going in a couple directions, and it's interesting and tasty. Okay, so go ahead and we'll dollop some whipped cream on here. And then place some strawberries on top. Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of pretty. And this, you don't need to dress this up at all. This cake is great just as sort of like a coffee cake, snack cake sort of thing. It's one of those cakes, it's not overly sweet, so it lends itself to, mid-morning snack, that sort of thing, or a lovely dessert. So I will take a little bite, which is just going to wreck the presentation, but it's inevitable. That's the thing with food, right? It's there and then it's gone. Very, very nice. Yeah, it's a great cake, and just a great time of year to take advantage of fresh rhubarb. Look for it in markets fresh. It does show up. It's sort of a brief period of time, but take advantage of that fresh rhubarb, or maybe you're growing rhubarb and have a plant, or you could plant a plant and plant a rhubarb, and you could try to find it frozen as well, and it's available frozen, which will work.
Cindy would like to know if you could add cinnamon to the recipe or other spices if you'd like.
Oh yeah, Cindy, add some spices. I think cinnamon would be a nice choice here. Maybe some cardamom would be lovely. But yeah, this is a simple enough recipe that you can definitely add some of your personal spice favorites to it, and it would just be delicious. Yes.
I bet ginger would be really good.
Ginger would be nice. Ginger and rhubarb and ginger and apples are both really nice combos. So I'd say a little bit of ginger would be good. And then also you can be creative with the top. If you decide to top it, you can add in different things into your whipped cream, all this stuff. It's a lot of fun. So I think that's what I've got for you this time around. Thank you so much for joining us for this. And come back for more classes. Check out the recipes on our website, and we have all these classes posted there as well. And until next time, happy cooking.